Under the glare of flashing red and blue lights, a power-tripping rookie officer believed he had caught an easy target in the back of a tinted SUV. He spotted a well-dressed black woman and thought it was his night to assert dominance on the road. What he failed to realize was that he had just pulled over the highest-ranking state Supreme Court justice in the district. And those two silent men in the front seats, they were not her chauffeurs. They were highly trained executive protection agents. Rain lashed against the reinforced glass of the black Chevrolet Suburban as it wound its way through the dark, heavily wooded stretches of Route 114. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was a sanctuary of controlled quiet, broken only by the rhythmic, muted thumping of the windshield wipers and the soft hum of the dual-zone climate control. The heavy ballistic doors sealed away the roar of the storm, creating a mobile fortress for the woman seated in the rear passenger compartment. Honorable Justice Amara Kingsley was exhausted. She was the first black woman to serve as the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, a position she had earned through decades of relentless, unyielding dedication to the law. She leaned her head back against the pristine leather headrest, closing her eyes for just a moment. The silver strands woven through her tightly coiled hair caught the ambient amber glow of the highway street lamps passing overhead. She had just spent hours at a high-profile legal symposium, delivering a keynote address on the fragile intersection of civil rights and modern law enforcement. The irony of the evening's topic was about to manifest itself in the most visceral way possible. In the front seats, the atmosphere was entirely different. It was relaxed, yet hummed with a low-voltage, ever-present vigilance. Driving the heavy SUV was Agent Julian Holt, a former military police officer turned executive protection specialist. His hands rested lightly but firmly at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel, his eyes constantly scanning the slick, wet asphalt and the dark tree lines framing the road. Beside him sat Agent Marcus Reed, the lead of Justice Kingsley's personal security detail. Marcus was a veteran of the state police's elite protection division, a man whose resting heart rate never seemed to spike, no matter the circumstance. "We are nearing the residence, Justice Kingsley," Marcus murmured, not turning around, his eyes fixed on the passenger side mirror. "Traffic is light, but the roads are pooling. We'll take it slow through the valley." "Take your time, Marcus," Amara replied, her voice smooth and deeply resonant, carrying the natural authority of a woman who commanded courtrooms with a single syllable. "I have no desire to rush. I still have appellate briefs to review before morning." Several miles behind them, nestled in the dark median of the highway, Officer Blaine Mercer sat in his idling patrol cruiser. Blaine was a man deeply frustrated by his own mediocrity. He had watched younger, sharper officers pass him by for promotions to detective and specialized units. He blamed everyone but himself, the brass, the system, and most frequently, the changing demographics of the county he patrolled. Tonight, he was cold, bored, and nursing a simmering anger over a reprimand he had received earlier for excessive use of force during a routine traffic stop. Blaine gripped the steering wheel of his cruiser, his knuckles white, staring out into the downpour. He was actively looking for an excuse. He wanted to exert control over something, someone, anything. Through the sheet of rain, the black Suburban crested the hill. It was moving at a compliant speed, perfectly in line with the posted limit. But to Blaine, it looked like an affront. The vehicle was entirely blacked out. The windows possessed a heavy, dark tint, legal for state-owned executive vehicles, but highly suspicious to an officer looking for a reason to strike. Because of the heavy rain and the glare of the street lights, Blaine entirely missed the subtle, recessed official state government plates mounted on the front and rear bumpers. "Look at this guy," Blaine muttered to himself, his lips curling into a sneer. "Thinks he owns the road, probably running drugs or moving stolen property." It was a baseless, absurd assumption, born entirely of Blaine's own prejudiced worldview. A high-end vehicle with tinted windows on his stretch of road late at night was automatically guilty of something. He shifted his cruiser into drive, the heavy engine roaring to life, and aggressively pulled out of the median, kicking up a massive spray of muddy water. Inside the Suburban, Julian noticed the headlights immediately. "We picked up a local unit," Julian said calmly, his voice flat and analytical. "Coming up fast in the left lane. He's riding my blind spot." Marcus shifted his broad shoulders, his hand instinctively resting near the center console where the secure communications radio sat. "Acknowledge, maintain speed. Don't give him a reason to think we're evasive." Blaine tailgated the Suburban for a considerable distance. He ran the plates through his onboard computer, but because the plates were heavily encrypted state executive tags, the local dispatch system returned a restricted, delayed result. Instead of waiting for the proper clearance code from the state database, Blaine let his impatience and arrogance win. He slammed his hand against the control panel, activating his light bar. A blinding barrage of red and blue strobes flooded the rain-soaked highway, reflecting off the wet pavement and lighting up the interior of the Suburban. "He's lighting us up," Julian announced, his tone utterly devoid of panic. He didn't brake suddenly. He signaled, smoothly changing lanes, and began searching for a safe, well-lit shoulder to pull over. "Let him," Justice Kingsley said from the back seat, setting her reading glasses down on top of her leather briefcase. She wasn't nervous. She was intensely annoyed. It's a miserable night for a traffic stop. Let's handle this quickly and professionally so the man can get out of the rain. Julian found a wide stretch of shoulder near an underpass and brought the heavy SUV to a gentle, complete stop. He immediately threw the vehicle into park, turned off the engine to ensure no accidental movement, and switched on the interior dome lights. It was standard protocol for a law enforcement stop. Make the interior visible, keep hands on the wheel, and ensure the officer feels safe. Behind them, Blaine parked his cruiser at an aggressive, protective angle. He stepped out into the freezing rain, pulling his collar up, his heavy boots crunching against the gravel. He rested his right hand deliberately on the butt of his service weapon. He was walking into this encounter not as a public servant conducting a traffic stop, but as an apex predator asserting his dominance. He had no idea he was walking straight into a hurricane. The rain battered Officer Mercer's shoulders as he marched toward the black SUV. In his left hand, he gripped a heavy tactical flashlight. Its beam was so intensely bright, it cut through the sheets of water like a solid object. He didn't approach the driver's side window with caution. He approached it with entitlement. He stopped just behind the B-pillar, shining the blinding beam directly into the side mirror to disorient the driver before stepping forward. Julian pressed the window control, lowering the heavy ballistic glass exactly halfway. The sound of the storm rushed into the quiet cabin along with the distinct smell of wet asphalt and ozone. Julian kept both of his hands firmly gripped on the top of the steering wheel, clearly visible. "Evening, officer," Julian said. His voice was steady, polite, and completely devoid of the fear or deference Blaine expected. Blaine leaned down, thrusting the flashlight straight into Julian's face. He took in Julian's appearance, a young, athletic black man wearing a sharply tailored dark suit. Blaine's jaw tightened. The profile he had constructed in his mind was hardening into a deeply racist reality. He didn't see a professional. He saw a target who was entirely too comfortable in an expensive vehicle. License, registration, and proof of insurance right now, Blaine snapped, bypassing any standard greeting or explanation for the stop. "Officer, if you could lower the flashlight, I would be happy to retrieve my credentials. They are in my breast pocket," Julian replied, maintaining his professional composure. "Did I ask for a debate, boy?" Blaine's voice raised a terrifying octave, the slur slipping out with practiced ease. "I said hand over the documents. Keep your hands where I can see them." In the passenger seat, Marcus Reed's posture shifted. It was a microscopic movement, but to anyone trained in combat or security, it was the equivalent of a hammer cocking back on a revolver. Marcus reached slowly into his own jacket, deliberately avoiding sudden movements. "Officer," Marcus intervened, his gravelly, authoritative voice cutting through the noise of the rain. "I am Agent Reed with State Executive Protection. The driver is Agent Holt. We are operating an official state vehicle. You need to lower your weapon hand and step back," Blaine scoffed, shining the flashlight over to Marcus, an older white man in a suit riding shotgun with a younger black driver. Blaine's twisted logic couldn't process the dynamic. He assumed Marcus was some high-priced private security or a corporate handler, a group local cops traditionally despised for their arrogance. "State protection, my ass," Blaine spat. "You boys think you can buy some flashing lights and fake badges on the internet and do whatever you want in my jurisdiction. I clocked you swerving back there." "That is a fabrication," Julian stated calmly. "I maintained my lane and a compliant speed. The dash camera running on this vehicle is currently uploading telemetry data directly to State Police Headquarters." The mention of a camera infuriated Blaine. It challenged his authority, challenging his control of the narrative. He swung the flashlight beam aggressively toward the back seat, trying to find more leverage, more reasons to escalate. The harsh white light hit Justice Amara Kingsley. She did not flinch. She sat perfectly upright, her dark eyes locking directly onto the glare of the flashlight. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer, a string of modest pearls, and an expression that had withered seasoned defense attorneys and arrogant prosecutors alike. Blaine peered through the rain-streaked glass, his mind heavily clouded by implicit bias and overt prejudice, made an immediate, catastrophic calculation. He didn't see a judge. He saw an older black woman sitting in the back of an SUV being driven by a young black man. "Who's in the back?" Blaine demanded, tapping his flashlight aggressively against the thick window glass. "This your mother, boy? Or are you running a high-end taxi service without a medallion?" Silence fell inside the cabin. It was not a silence of fear, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a bomb, with the timer ticking down to 0. "Officer," Justice Kingsley finally spoke. Her voice didn't compete with the rain. It pierced right through it. "You have pulled over a state-registered vehicle without probable cause. You have used racially charged language toward my driver. You are currently resting your hand on your firearm during a non-threatening encounter. I strongly advise you to contact your shift supervisor immediately." Blaine let out a harsh, ugly laugh. The absolute sheer nerve of this woman telling him how to do his job in his county. The badge pinned to his chest felt like a shield that gave him absolute immunity against the people he deemed beneath him. "Listen to me very carefully, lady." Blaine leaned closer to the window, his breath fogging the glass. "I don't care if you think you know your rights. Out here on this highway, I am the law. You people think you can just talk your way out of everything. Not tonight. Blaine took half a step back and unclipped the retention strap on his holster. The unmistakable snap of the thick leather echoed over the rain. "Driver, out of the vehicle, now!" Blaine commanded, drawing his weapon halfway out of the holster. "Passenger, keep your hands on the dashboard. Lady in the back, keep your mouth shut." The dynamic in the car inverted instantly. This was no longer a disrespectful traffic stop. It was an active, lethal threat to a state official. "Negative," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, completely losing the polite veneer. He did not move to unbuckle his seatbelt. Marcus's radio clicked on. He didn't use the handset. He used the lapel mic pinned to his collar. "Dispatch, this is Detail Alpha. We have a code red on Route 114. Local unit has gone hostile and is unholstering his weapon. Requesting immediate tactical backup from state troopers. Barracks 9. Blaine heard the radio transmission. Panic, mixed with a sudden surge of adrenaline, flooded his system. He thought they were bluffing, trying to intimidate him with fake radio chatter. "I said, get out of the car!" Blaine screamed, fully drawing his 9mm sidearm and pointing it directly at Julian's chest through the open window. Before Blaine could even blink, the response was executed with terrifying, synchronized precision. Julian threw his left shoulder forward, entirely unbothered by the gun in his face, his right hand dropping to the heavy Sig Sauer, securely holstered at his hip. Simultaneously, Marcus threw open his passenger door, launching his frame out into the driving rain, pulling his own weapon, and clearing the hood of the SUV in 2 massive strides. Within moments, Officer Blaine found himself standing in the mud, his gun pointed at Julian, while a deeply furious, heavily armed state protection agent had a laser-sighted weapon aimed squarely at the side of his skull from across the hood. "Drop the weapon! Drop the weapon now!" Marcus roared, his voice echoing like thunder across the empty highway. "State Police, you drop that weapon, or I will put you in the ground." Inside the back seat, Justice Kingsley calmly picked up her secure mobile phone, bypassing local dispatch entirely, and dialed the personal cell phone number of the county police commissioner. The trap Blaine thought he had set had just clamped down viciously on his own leg. The torrential rain felt as though it were turning into solid sheets of ice against Officer Blaine Mercer's face. But the cold was nothing compared to the sudden, freezing terror paralyzing his chest. Time seemed to snap to a grinding halt on the desolate stretch of Route 114. Blaine stood frozen, his service weapon trembling in his grip, aimed at Julian's chest through the open window of the Suburban. But Blaine's eyes were no longer on the young driver. They were wide, heavily dilated, and locked squarely on the red laser dot dancing menacingly across his own right cheekbone. Marcus Reed had not just drawn his weapon. He had moved with the lethal, practiced fluidity of a man who had spent decades neutralizing high-level threats. He stood behind the cover of the heavy engine block. His two-handed grip on his customized Glock 19 was perfectly stable despite the driving storm. "I will not repeat myself, local," Marcus's voice roared again, possessing a terrifying, metallic edge that cut entirely through the sound of the pelting rain. "Lower the firearm, place it on the pavement, and step back with your hands interlaced behind your head. You have only moments before I consider you an active shooter." Inside the vehicle, Julian had not drawn his weapon, but his thumb had quietly disengaged the retention hood of his holster. His eyes remained locked on Blaine's trigger finger. Julian's breathing was slow and measured. "Listen to him, Mercer," Julian said, his voice eerily calm, devoid of any anger or panic. "You are experiencing an adrenaline dump. Breathe. Do not make a mistake you cannot undo. Put the gun down." Blaine's mind was short-circuiting. The power fantasy he had been riding just moments prior had violently shattered, replaced by the grim realization that the man aiming at him from across the hood was entirely prepared to pull the trigger. Blaine slowly, almost mechanically, began to lower his 9mm pistol. In the back seat, completely unbothered by the drawn weapons outside her window, Justice Amara Kingsley pressed her secure mobile phone to her ear. The line connected after a couple of rings. "Everett, it is Justice Kingsley," Amara said, her voice carrying an icy, commanding stillness that immediately woke the commissioner from his stupor. "Justice Kingsley, good evening, ma'am. Is everything all right? Are you calling regarding the appellate decision tomorrow?" Commissioner Everett Shaw asked, the confusion evident in his tone. "I am calling you from the back of my state-issued vehicle on Route 114, northbound," Amara stated, enunciating every syllable with terrifying clarity. "One of your patrolmen, a man whose name tag reads Mercer, has just illegally detained my vehicle. Furthermore, he has drawn his service weapon and aimed it directly at the chest of my driver, Agent Holt." There was a dead, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. The sound of Shaw violently knocking over a glass of water on his nightstand echoed through the earpiece. "He did what?" Shaw gasped, the blood draining from his face. "Justice Kingsley, are you unharmed? Is your detail engaged?" "Agent Reed currently has your officer at gunpoint from across the hood of my vehicle to prevent him from discharging his weapon," Amara explained casually, as if she were dictating a grocery list. I suggest you dispatch the state police to our exact GPS coordinates immediately, Everett. If your man twitches, my detail will be forced to eliminate the threat. Do you understand me? God Almighty, Shaw breathed, sheer panic overtaking him. I am patching directly to the state police barracks right now. Hold the line, Justice. Please tell your agents to hold their fire. Help is on the way. Outside, Blaine finally let his weapon slip from his fingers. It clattered loudly onto the wet asphalt. "Kick it away! Kick it under the car!" Marcus barked, not lowering his Glock a single inch. Blaine blindly kicked the pistol with his heavy boot, sending it skidding beneath the Suburban. He raised his hands, his fingers trembling violently, and laced them behind his head. He was hyperventilating, the rain mixing with the cold sweat pouring down his forehead. "I didn't know," Blaine stammered, his voice cracking. The racist bravado entirely evaporated. I thought the vehicle was." "Shut your mouth," Marcus ordered, moving out from behind the hood, keeping his weapon trained on Blaine's chest as he closed the distance. "Turn around. Face your cruiser. Do not move a single muscle." Before Blaine could even turn fully around, the distant wailing shriek of sirens pierced the night. Within seconds, the sound morphed into a deafening roar. Over the crest of the hill, a terrifying procession of headlights and blue strobes broke through the darkness. It was not local backup. It was a swarm of heavy state police interceptors. Several Dodge Charger pursuit vehicles and tactical SUVs descended upon the scene, boxing Blaine's lone cruiser in completely. The vehicles screeched to a halt, angles intersecting to create a barricade. Doors flew open, and nearly a dozen heavily armed state troopers swarmed out into the rain. "State police, hands in the air. Get on the ground. Face down on the pavement, now." The commands came from multiple directions. Trooper Nolan Graves, a massive mountain of a man in a dark rain slicker, led the charge. He didn't wait for Blaine to comply. Nolan closed the gap, grabbed the back of Blaine's uniform collar, and violently swept the corrupt cop's legs out from under him. Blaine hit the freezing, puddle-soaked asphalt hard, face first. The wind was entirely knocked out of his lungs. Before he could even gasp for air, Nolan's heavy knee dropped squarely into the center of his spine, pinning him to the ground. Steel handcuffs ratcheted tightly around Blaine's wrists, biting into his skin. "Detail Alpha, this is Trooper Graves. Suspect is secured," Nolan shouted over the rain, looking up at Marcus. Marcus finally lowered his weapon, clicking the safety back into place before sliding it smoothly into his shoulder holster. He nodded to Nolan. "Good response time, Trooper. The suspect's weapon is under the front axle of my vehicle. Secure it for evidence." Blaine lay in the muddy water, his cheek pressed against the rough, freezing pavement. The blue and red strobe lights from multiple cruisers flashed intensely around him, illuminating the catastrophic ruin of his life. He looked up, his vision blurry from the rain, and watched as Julian calmly stepped out of the driver's side door, adjusting his suit jacket, not a single drop of sweat on his brow. Blaine was completely, utterly trapped. The predator had just become the prey. The torrential downpour finally began to ease into a steady, persistent drizzle, though the flashing blue lights of the state police interceptors still painted the wet highway in erratic, strobing colors. The perimeter had been completely locked down. Yellow crime scene tape was already being strung between the cruisers, effectively closing the northbound lanes of Route 114. Officer Blaine Mercer was yanked to his feet by two burly state troopers. He was soaked to the bone, shivering violently, his uniform covered in mud and gravel. They dragged him toward the back of a state cruiser, pushing him roughly against the rear door to search him. Blaine's mind raced, desperately trying to construct a narrative that could save him. "You guys don't understand," Blaine pleaded, his voice high-pitched and frantic. He looked at Trooper Graves, who was thoroughly patting down his pockets. They were driving erratically. The windows were totally blacked out. The driver refused to comply with my lawful orders. I felt my life was in danger. You have to believe me. I'm on the job. I'm one of you. Nolan pulled Blaine's spare magazines from his duty belt and tossed them into an evidence bag held by another trooper. He looked at Blaine with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You are not one of us," Nolan growled, his voice a low rumble. "You're a liability in a badge." A sleek, unmarked silver Ford Explorer pulled up to the perimeter tape, its hidden grille lights flashing silently. The doors opened, and Captain Elise Thornton stepped out. Elise was the commanding officer of the State Police Internal Affairs and Executive Protection Division. She was a sharply featured woman wearing a heavy waterproof tactical jacket over her dress uniform. Her eyes scanned the scene, taking in the disarmed local cop, the heavily guarded Suburban, and her own troopers securing the area. Elise marched directly toward the black Suburban. Marcus Reed met her halfway, extending a hand. "Captain Thornton," Marcus said, his tone thoroughly professional. "The scene is secure. Subject has been disarmed and taken into custody." "Agent Reed, are you and Agent Holt uninjured?" Elise asked, her piercing gaze darting toward the driver's side, where Julian was standing quietly by the door. "We are perfectly fine, Captain. However, the local officer escalated a routine baseless traffic stop to a lethal force encounter within minutes. He drew his firearm on Agent Holt and aimed for center mass. Elise's jaw tightened. "Did your dash system capture the audio and video?" "Every second of it," Julian interjected, stepping forward. "Both exterior wide-angle and interior cabin feeds. The telemetry data proving we never exceeded the speed limit or swerved was live-streamed to dispatch the moment his light bar activated." Elise nodded firmly. She turned on her heel and walked over to where Blaine was being held against the cruiser. Blaine saw the gold captain's oak leaves on her collar and immediately tried to stand taller, trying to project some semblance of authority. "Captain, please let me explain," Blaine begged, the panic leaking entirely through his facade. "These guys are lying. The driver was hostile. He reached for something. I had to draw my weapon to maintain control of the stop." Elise stopped a short distance from him. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She simply stared at him with a look of terrifying, cold calculation. "Officer Mercer," Elise began, her voice carrying easily in the damp night air. "In a short while, the county police commissioner, your precinct captain, and the district attorney are going to arrive on this highway. They are not coming here to back you up. They are coming here to personally witness the destruction of your career." Blaine swallowed hard, his throat dry despite the rain. "Captain, I didn't do anything wrong. It was a lawful stop. You pulled over a state-registered executive vehicle," Elise corrected him, her tone completely merciless. "You utilized racially charged, derogatory language toward a sworn state protection agent. You unholstered your weapon and aimed it at a fellow law enforcement officer without provocation. And you did all of this while threatening the life of the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court." The words hit Blaine like a physical blow to the stomach. The air rushed out of his lungs. "The who?" Elise didn't answer. She simply looked past him. The heavy, armored rear door of the Suburban opened with a solid, mechanical clack. Julian immediately stepped to the door, opening a large black golf umbrella to shield the passenger from the lingering drizzle. Justice Amara Kingsley stepped out onto the wet asphalt. She looked immaculate. Her charcoal blazer was perfectly crisp, her posture entirely unbowed by the chaos that had just unfolded. She walked slowly, deliberately, toward the cruiser where Blaine was being held. The state troopers instinctively straightened up, stepping back slightly to give the Chief Justice the floor. Blaine shrank against the side of the car. The horrific reality of his prejudice was staring him right in the face. The older black woman he had arrogantly assumed was a nobody. The woman he had ordered to keep her mouth shut was the highest-ranking legal authority in the state. Justice Kingsley stopped just outside the reach of the umbrella, letting the light rain fall onto her shoulders. She looked at Blaine. She didn't look at him with hatred. She looked at him with the profound, devastating pity of a judge observing a condemned man. "Officer Mercer," Amara said, her voice smooth, calm, and utterly lethal. "You told me earlier that out here on this highway, you are the law." Blaine tried to speak, but his vocal cords seized. He could only shake his head, his eyes wide with absolute terror. "You are mistaken," Amara continued, her gaze pinning him to the cruiser like a butterfly on a corkboard. "You are merely an enforcement mechanism of the law, a mechanism that has fundamentally failed. The law is a shield meant to protect the vulnerable from the malicious. Tonight, you chose to be the malicious. You allowed your bias, your unchecked ego, and your blatant racism to override your oath." "Your Honor, please," Blaine whispered, tears of pure panic finally mixing with the rain on his cheeks. "I made a mistake. I just made a mistake." "A mistake is misreading a license plate," Amara corrected him, her tone completely devoid of sympathy. "Drawing a deadly weapon on an innocent man because of the color of his skin is not a mistake. It is a crime, and it is a crime you committed while wearing a badge, which makes it a profound betrayal of public trust." She turned slightly, looking at Captain Thornton. "Captain, what are the preliminary charges?" "Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, official misconduct, reckless endangerment, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law." "Your Honor," Elise recited instantly. "All felonies. He will be processed at the state barracks, not his local precinct. He will be held without bail." Amara nodded once. She looked back at the trembling, ruined man in the handcuffs. "You thought you were dealing with people who had no voice, Officer Mercer," Amara said softly, turning to walk back to her vehicle. "Soon you will find out just how loud the justice system can speak." Fluorescent lights buzzed with a nauseating, relentless hum inside Interrogation Room 4 at the State Police Central Barracks. The sterile, windowless room smelled of strong bleach and stale coffee, a stark contrast to the fresh, rain-soaked highway where Blaine Mercer had stood just hours earlier. Blaine was no longer wearing his dark blue patrol uniform, nor did he possess his heavy-duty belt or the badge that had fueled his arrogance. Those items had been seized, bagged, and tagged as critical evidence. Instead, he sat shivering in a shapeless, paper-thin, orange detention jumpsuit, the heavy steel handcuffs tethering his wrists to the solid metal loop bolted to the interrogation table clinked loudly with his every nervous tremor. Blaine looked absolutely hollowed out. The adrenaline had long since crashed, leaving him with a crippling, overwhelming sense of doom. Across the steel table sat his union-appointed legal counsel, Attorney Silas Crow. Silas was a seasoned, cynical defense attorney who had spent years bailing out overzealous cops. However, tonight, Silas looked deeply nauseated. He kept rubbing his temples, refusing to make eye contact with his client. The heavy metal door clicked open, and Captain Elise Thornton walked in, followed closely by the county district attorney, Quentin Vale. Quentin was a notoriously aggressive prosecutor with zero tolerance for police corruption, especially when it threatened the public trust in his jurisdiction. Elise carried a sleek silver laptop, which she deliberately set down on the table, flipping the screen open to face Blaine and his lawyer. "Good morning, gentlemen," Quentin said, his voice dripping with absolute frost. "We are going to make this exceptionally brief. Mr. Crow, I assume you have briefed your client on the catastrophic reality of his current situation." "I have advised my client to remain silent, Quentin," Silas replied wearily, leaning back in his creaking metal chair. "We are simply here to formally hear the charges before the arraignment. I want to discuss bail parameters." Quentin let out a short, humorless laugh. "Bail? Bail? There is no universe where this man sees the outside of a cell pending trial. But before we discuss his extended stay in county lockup, Captain Thornton is going to show you exactly why I will not be offering a plea deal of any kind." Elise tapped a key on the laptop. The screen flared to life, displaying the crystal-clear, high-definition dashcam footage from Justice Kingsley's Suburban. Because the vehicle was equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance tech used for executive protection, the video did not just show the front windshield. It showed a split screen. The exterior view of Blaine approaching aggressively, and the interior cabin view illuminated by the dome light. The audio was horrifyingly pristine. Blaine's voice boomed from the laptop speakers. "Did I ask for a debate, boy?" Silas visibly flinched at the racial slur. He closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. The video continued playing. It showed Marcus Reed, calm and professional, identifying himself and the driver as state executive protection agents. It captured Blaine's sneering dismissal. Then the camera shifted slightly as Blaine aggressively aimed his flashlight into the back seat, harassing the Chief Justice herself. "This your mother, boy? Or are you running a high-end taxi service without a medallion?" Blaine watched the screen, his face draining of whatever color it had left. Seeing his own behavior played back from an objective, third-party angle stripped away all the self-righteous justification he had built up in his head. He looked like a monster. He sounded like a petty, racist tyrant. Then came the climax. The video clearly showed Blaine unholstering his weapon, completely unprovoked, and pointing it directly at Agent Julian Holt's chest. Elise paused the video on the exact frame where Blaine's gun was leveled at the driver. The timestamp glowed brightly in the bottom corner. "Unprovoked escalation to lethal force," Quentin stated coldly, tapping his pen against the table. "Targeting an on-duty state protection agent, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, aggravated assault. And to make matters worse, Internal Affairs raided your precinct about an hour ago. We pulled your personnel file, Mercer." Blaine's head snapped up, panic flaring in his bloodshot eyes. "My file?" "Yes, your file," Elise interjected, crossing her arms. "Your precinct captain, Gordon Pierce, tried to bury multiple civilian complaints filed against you in recent years for excessive use of force and racial profiling during traffic stops. He thought he could sweep your behavior under the rug to protect the department's statistics." Silas looked at Elise, completely alarmed by this new information. "Captain Pierce is involved. Captain Pierce was suspended without pay shortly ago," Quentin said ruthlessly. "Justice Kingsley did not just call the county commissioner tonight. She made a direct phone call to United States Attorney General Merrick Garland's office in Washington. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division is dispatching a federal oversight team to your precinct by tomorrow. They are going to tear your department down to the studs, Mercer. And you are the catalyst." Blaine let out a choked, desperate sob. The magnitude of what he had done was finally crushing him. He had not just ruined his own life. He had inadvertently triggered a federal investigation into his entire chain of command. The hard karma he had been dodging for years had finally caught up, and it was arriving like a freight train. "I'll quit," Blaine blurted out, tears spilling down his face, completely ignoring his lawyer's advice to stay quiet. "I'll resign right now. Take my pension. Just please don't send me to federal prison. They'll kill me in there. I have a wife. I have a mortgage." Quentin leaned in close, his eyes completely devoid of mercy. "You should have thought about your wife and your mortgage before you pulled a loaded gun on a black man simply because you didn't like the car he was driving. You are an absolute disgrace to the badge you wore. The state will seek the maximum penalty on all counts." Morning sunlight poured through the towering arched windows of the county courthouse, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the heavy, tense air of courtroom 101. The gallery was packed beyond maximum capacity. Every wooden bench was filled with local reporters, national news correspondents, civil rights advocates, and off-duty police officers who had come to witness the spectacle. The atmosphere was incredibly suffocating. Blaine Mercer sat at the defense table, looking completely shattered. He was still wearing the bright orange county jail uniform, His wrists and ankles were securely shackled, with heavy steel chains that rattled loudly every time he shifted his weight. He kept his head bowed, staring blankly at the scarred wooden surface of the wall. He was entirely isolated. His life outside the courtroom had already collapsed with terrifying speed. Just before the hearing, Silas Crow had handed Blaine a manila envelope. Inside were expedited divorce papers filed by Blaine's wife, who had immediately packed up their 2 children and left the state to stay with her parents, horrified and deeply humiliated by the national news coverage of her husband's racist tirade. Furthermore, the local police union president, Marvin Cole, had held a live press conference officially disavowing Blaine's actions and severing all union-funded legal support. Silas was now operating merely as a court-appointed public defender until Blaine could secure private counsel, which he could no longer afford. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed, cutting through the low murmur of the crowded gallery. Everyone in the room stood at attention. From the heavy oak doors behind the bench emerged Judge Helena Frost. She was a formidable, no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for handing down incredibly harsh sentences to public officials who abused their power. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and slammed her wooden gavel down with a sharp, echoing crack. "Be seated," Judge Frost ordered, opening the thick case file placed before her. She scanned the preliminary indictment, her expression growing darker with every page she turned. "We are here for the arraignment and bail hearing of State versus Blaine Mercer. The charges are numerous and severe, including aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and federal civil rights violations." She looked over the top of her reading glasses directly at the defense table. "Mr. Crow, how does your client plead?" Silas stood up, looking visibly exhausted. "Not guilty, Your Honor. At this time, we are formally requesting that Mr. Mercer be released on bail pending trial. He is a lifelong resident of this county, a former public servant, and has no prior criminal convictions. He is not a flight risk." Before Silas could even finish his sentence, District Attorney Quentin Vale stood up from the prosecution table, his posture rigid with righteous indignation. "Objection, Your Honor. The state strongly opposes bail in any amount," Quentin stated, his voice echoing powerfully through the large courtroom. "The defendant is absolutely a threat to the community. He used his position of authority, his state-issued firearm, and the cover of darkness to terrorize innocent citizens. The dashcam footage, which has already been entered into evidence, unequivocally proves that Mr. Mercer is prone to extreme racially motivated violence without any provocation whatsoever." Quentin paused, letting his words sink into the silent gallery. He gestured toward Blaine. Furthermore, Your Honor, the victims of this assault were not just ordinary citizens. The defendant drew a lethal weapon on 2 sworn state protection agents and unlawfully detained the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. If an armed, uniformed police officer is willing to attempt a roadside execution of a state official over a bruised ego, there is absolutely no telling what he would do to an average citizen if allowed back on the streets. He is a profound danger to society. Judge Frost nodded slowly, turning her piercing gaze back to Blaine. The disgraced cop couldn't even look up to meet her eyes. He was trembling so violently that the chains around his ankles clinked against the chair legs. "Mr. Crow," Judge Frost said, her voice dripping with judicial disdain. "Your client took an oath to protect and serve. Instead, he chose to operate as an armed thug, utilizing a badge as a shield for his own virulent bigotry. The sheer audacity required to draw a weapon on a compliant driver over a fabricated traffic violation is staggering." She closed the file with a loud, decisive snap. "The public must have absolute faith that those who enforce the law are not immune to it," Judge Frost declared, her voice ringing out like a death knell for Blaine's freedom. Given the overwhelming video and audio evidence, the severity of the felonies charged, and the egregious abuse of official power, this court finds that the defendant poses a clear and present danger to the public. She raised her gavel high into the air. "Bail is categorically denied. The defendant is hereby remanded to the custody of the county sheriff until the conclusion of this trial. And let the record reflect that given the federal civil rights probes now active in this jurisdiction, this court will recommend transferring the defendant to a high-security federal penitentiary should he be convicted." The gavel slammed down like a thunderclap. Bang! Blaine completely broke down. A loud, guttural sob tore from his throat as the sheriff's deputies immediately stepped forward, grabbing him roughly by the shoulders. They hauled him to his feet, ignoring his weeping. As they dragged the disgraced, ruined cop out of the courtroom through the side door, the gallery remained entirely silent, watching the brutal, unyielding hammer of justice smash a corrupt man's life into absolute dust. In the federal courtroom, the atmosphere was thick with the suffocating weight of absolute, inescapable finality. The local state trial had never even materialized. The moment the federal government intervened, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division completely consumed the case, elevating it from a local scandal to a massive, sweeping federal indictment. Blaine Mercer sat at the defense table, but he was virtually unrecognizable from the arrogant, aggressive patrolman who had strutted through the rain on Route 114. The time spent in federal hold, spent entirely in administrative segregation for his own physical protection, had aged him dramatically. His posture was perpetually hunched, his shoulders caved inward. The stark white federal prison jumpsuit hung loosely on his dramatically thinned frame. His hair had grayed at the temples, and his eyes darted nervously around the room, haunted by the brutal reality of his shattered existence. The federal oversight probe, initiated by Justice Amara Kingsley's phone call, had acted like a sledgehammer to a rotten foundation. The FBI and DOJ investigators did not just look at Blaine. They tore up the floorboards of his entire precinct. What they found was a terrifying, deeply entrenched syndicate of corruption, quota padding, and systemic racial profiling entirely orchestrated by Captain Gordon Pierce. The ultimate twist of hard karma had arrived when Blaine realized the brotherhood he thought protected him did not exist. The very moment the federal agents raided the precinct, Captain Pierce had attempted to entirely frame Blaine as a lone wolf, falsifying backdated internal memos to claim he had been trying to fire Blaine for months. Betrayed, abandoned, and facing a potential life sentence for federal civil rights violations, Blaine had no choice to completely flip on his former commanding officer. He spent countless hours in heavily guarded interrogation rooms, handing the FBI every piece of evidence, every text message, and every illegal directive Pierce had ever issued. Because of Blaine's desperate cooperation, Captain Pierce and several other senior officers were currently sitting in federal custody, indicted under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The precinct was placed under an aggressive federal consent decree. "All rise," the court deputy announced, his voice echoing sharply off the high ceilings. "The Honorable Judge Everett Lang, a federal judge known for his merciless sentencing in police corruption cases, took his seat behind the towering mahogany bench." He looked down at Blaine with an expression of profound, chilling indifference. "Mr. Mercer," Judge Lang began, his voice amplified by the microphone filling the silent courtroom. "The court has reviewed the exhaustive plea agreement reached between your defense counsel and Assistant United States Attorney Clara Benson. You have agreed to plead guilty to one count of deprivation of rights under color of law and one count of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. In exchange for your ongoing cooperation against your former commanding officers, the government is capping its sentencing recommendation at 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Do you fully understand these terms?" "Yes, Your Honor," Blaine whispered, his voice cracking, barely audible over the hum of the courtroom's ventilation system. He leaned closer to the microphone. "Yes, I understand. Before I formally accept this plea and hand down my sentence," Judge Lang stated, folding his hands together, The court recognizes that the primary victim of this egregious assault is present and wishes to deliver an impact statement. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Justice Amara Kingsley walked down the center aisle. She moved with the same unyielding, majestic grace that she had possessed on the side of that rain-slicked highway. She wore a tailored navy blue suit, her expression composed, entirely devoid of vindictiveness, but radiating absolute authority. She was flanked quietly by Agent Julian Holt and Agent Marcus Reed, both men wearing impeccably cut suits, their presence a silent, powerful reminder of the night Blaine's reign of terror ended. Justice Kingsley stepped up to the wooden podium facing the judge, but she slowly turned her body so she could look directly at the defense table. Blaine visibly flinched, dropping his gaze to his shackled hands. "Look at me, Mr. Mercer," Amara commanded softly. The absolute power in her voice forced his chin up. He met her eyes, tears instantly welling in his own. For months, the media has focused on the dramatic confrontation on that highway. Amara spoke, her resonant voice captivating every single person in the gallery. They have focused on the drawn weapons, the flashing lights, and the shocking revelation of my identity. But that is not what matters here today. What matters is the terrifying reality of what would have happened if I were not a state Supreme Court justice. What if Agent Holt was simply a young man driving home from a late shift? What if he did not possess the elite tactical training to remain perfectly calm while a loaded firearm was aimed at his chest? She took a slow, deliberate breath. You did not pull us over because of a traffic violation. You pulled us over because you felt entitled to dominate those you perceived as lesser than yourself. You weaponized the incredible power of the state to enforce your own bigotry. You betrayed the sacred oath you swore, poisoning the well of public trust for every honest, dedicated law enforcement officer who actually risks their life to protect their community. Blaine squeezed his eyes shut, a tear rolling down his hollow cheek. I do not stand here today seeking vengeance, Amara continued, turning her gaze back to Judge Lang. Vengeance is petty, and it does not heal the wounds of a broken system. I stand here to ensure absolute accountability. The badge is a symbol of public service, not a shield for criminality. Let the sentence handed down today serve as a permanent, echoing warning to any officer who believes their prejudice is greater than the law. Justice Kingsley nodded to the judge and walked back to her seat, sitting down beside Julian and Marcus. Judge Lang adjusted his glasses, his face set in stone. There is absolutely nothing further to deliberate, Blaine Mercer. Based on your own admissions, your egregious abuse of power, and the terrifying threat you pose to innocent lives, I hereby sentence you to exactly 15 years in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. You will serve this time at United States Penitentiary, Lewisburg. There is no possibility of early parole. May you use the next decade and a half to deeply reflect upon the lives you attempted to destroy and the life you have rightfully forfeited. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down with deafening finality. The sound echoed through the whole courtroom like a gunshot. United States Marshals immediately flanked Blaine, grabbing him by the biceps as they hauled him away to begin his long, miserable sentence in federal prison. He looked over his shoulder one last time. He saw Justice Kingsley standing tall, watching him leave. The ultimate embodiment of the justice he had so arrogantly tried to pervert. Hard karma had not just knocked on his door, it had completely leveled his house. What a massive, devastating dose of hard karma. Officer Mercer thought he was an untouchable king of the highway, but his blatant racism and ego cost him his freedom, his family, and brought a federal hammer down on his entire corrupt department. Justice Kingsley proved that no one is above the law, and true accountability always wins. What did you think of the Chief Justice's powerful courtroom speech? Let us know your favorite moment in the comments. If you loved this story of justice served, make sure to like the video, share it, and subscribe for more.